thanks for joining us on another episode of Tea and Trowels, FPAN's new web series featuring conversations with archaeologists about their research and what archaeology means to them. Today I'm joined with NOAA archaeologist Joe Hoyt. Thanks for joining me. Would you like to introduce yourself and your mug?
Absolutely. My name's Joe Hoyt. I'm the National Maritime Heritage Coordinator in the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. My mug is an old tin mug that was gifted to me by a good friend of mine with the instructions it was to be for sea stories, tea, and whiskey, which I'm breaking those rules and have it filled with coffee at the moment, but it's a classic mug.
Oh, that's awesome. And I hope we can get a few sea stories in questions today. So why did you become an archaeologist?
You know, I became an archaeologist. It's funny, people always ask me, how did you get into archaeology or marine archaeology? It's, for a lot of folks that aren't part of the field, it always sounds like kind of an exotic profession. And my initial response is like, well, everybody I know is an archaeologist. It doesn't seem that strange at all. But I got into archaeology because of my father, and I really got into scuba diving up on the Great Lakes when I was in high school. And was really fortunate to take an avocational archaeology class through Bowling Green University that kind of introduced me to field operations and surveying shipwrecks up in the Great Lakes. And I got hooked on it hard and fell in love with it and said, how can this be a career? So pretty straight trajectory, really. It's kind of the only thing I've ever done.
That's awesome. I have never dove in the Great Lakes. I don't know if I ever will. I left Erie, Pennsylvania to move to Florida.
Oh, you're a traitor.
I know.
You've got Great Lake blood. You need to get back.
Well, I learned to dive in Florida, so now I'm 75-degree water is cold, so I don't know how I'll be able to handle it. And I forgot to introduce my mug, which I think I have to drink a little bit more tea before I show you the reason why I chose it, but
oh, can you excavate a little?
It is a maritime mug, and I have a little ship on the inside.
Awesome.
So it also has a cool little tentacle handle.
Kraken handle, excellent. Excellent.
A lot of maritime mugs, and eventually I'll run out of them.
But the Great Lakes, a lot of people prefer the warm Caribbean waters, but from an archaeological perspective, the Great Lakes are about as good as it gets for preservation of older wrecks. The sites that you find up there are just absolutely stunning. These old wooden wrecks that are still, completely intact, mass upright, still standing. They just look unbelievable. It's what I always say to folks is the wrecks in the Great Lakes look like shipwrecks for people that don't know what shipwrecks look like. It's sort of like the Disney version of what a shipwreck should be. Just spectacular.
When I show do a maritime archaeology talk to the public, I have two images, and I show one of the Erebus. Did they find that? Yes. So it's the Erebus, which looks like you said, a shipwreck for someone who wants to know what a shipwreck looks like. And then I show them one of the wrecks down in the Keys, which is just a pile of ballast. And I explained the differences between cold and warm water, what Florida shipwrecks really look like. So I think that's a good example where those colder water wrecks, the preservation just lasts a little bit longer. This is a perfect dive into in 30 seconds, what is your research?
So my research sort of specialty areas focus on Great Lakes shipwrecks and World War II maritime history. For the last 10, 12 years, most of my research is focused on doing a characterization study of World War II shipwrecks off the East Coast, particularly off of the coast of North Carolina, looking at the Battle of the Atlantic. But in the last year, I've shifted my career towards the sort of national level of our program. And so my research focus is a little bit broader now, looking at sites up in the Great Lakes and kind of all throughout the National Marine Sanctuary system.
Oh, awesome. That's nice encompassing of U.S. maritime heritage. We recently spoke with Tane about the Battle of the Atlantic and the Monitor Preserve. Get to know a little bit more about that. I'm glad that
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. I had worked with Tony and I worked together for a long time. I was down at the Monitor for a little over 10 years.
Oh, awesome.
Just transitioned up to our headquarters office in DC. So I found the one spot in my house that looks like someone's lived in it for more than a week or two. So the rest of it's covered in boxes and still unpacking. So.
Oh, wow. So was a really recent transition.
Yeah, just in January. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to go back into what is your favorite tool in your toolkit?
My favorite tool generally is photo and video. And I think that, we've got an amazing array of tools that we can use as archaeologists. Remote sensing equipment, other types of survey equipment. But the simplest and most valuable tool is camera equipment. And it allows us to really quickly capture a representation of our site, but also gives us the ability, if done well, to capture the interests of the public and engage them with our things. So I've got with me an underwater camera, it's kind of a relic itself. This is an old Nautilus 5 film camera. One of the, these Nautilus systems were great underwater cameras. They were one of the few camera systems that actually ground the optical glass for underwater use. So the glass in these things is still really good. I mean, I have it as a mantelpiece ornament now, but as we've moved into digital SLRs and all these other things, and have kind of really displaced the film systems. But I feel like a camera is kind of the first, most basic and essential tool for what we do.
Oh, I would agree, especially with underwater and bringing that information to the public. Just because I know about this, but you have a lot of, or NOAA themselves has a lot of underwater virtual dives that people can take from the comfort of their living room. Do you want to maybe briefly highlight that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we try to do with our work is, we try, because we're a public-facing agency, we always, and we have the mission of engaging folks and getting people to care about these resources. We always try to structure what we do and the data that we collect to kind of serve two purposes. One is to kind of meet our preservation and resource management mandates, but also to create products that have the ability to engage folks that don't have the capacity to get out to these special places. So we focus heavily on doing 3D photogrammetry, modeling shipwrecks and representing them through that approach. And then also recently we've been focusing on doing 3D virtual dives, where we create these sort of virtual reality spaces that somebody can put on a virtual reality headset and experience what it's like to be able to actually look around in these spaces. So we're continually trying to figure out ways that we can sort of virtually put people into the water. We've got a really cool initiative that's been going on for a couple of years in our program and around the NOAA's marine science reach through ocean exploration research to do telepresence. And we've got we do some in-house work, but we also partner with a number of pretty heavy hitters in that sphere, Nautilus Live, Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration, to put these systems on the seabed in sites that are incredibly deep water and beam that live across the internet so people can participate in those things. So we've got a pretty broad spectrum of approaches that we have to try to share these resources and that sense of discovery with people that are sitting in their own homes, which is now more relevant than ever. So.
It is. Trying to get outside as much as possible might even just be trying to get into some virtual reality in your living room. I know I have not been able to get to any body of water for quite some time, about almost 6 weeks now. So I've been feeling a little bit of an itch. Had to cancel multiple dive trips that I had planned.
I know. If it goes on too long, I'm just gonna have to fill up my bathtub and put on my mask and sink in it for a little while.
Exactly. It's one moment where I wish that my house that I live in had a pool that I could just, put on some gear and clean it.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your best, worst field story? So something that's happened at the time was awful, but is now something you can look back on and kind of get a good giggle.
Yeah, you gave me the heads up on this, and I ran through. It was fun to kind of run through my mind of all the adventures over the years. I think one of the things that kind of comes to mind is we had, and this is kind of a classic example of what it's like to do remote sensing operations, but we had built a survey package to look at look at some deep water targets that we had found, and we've been looking for them for a long time. We thought maybe one of them might be a German U-boat and a site that it sunk, and we were using an AUV, an autonomous underwater vehicle that is kind of pre-programmed and goes down, runs the survey, comes back up, and we can download the data later. So you're not seeing it in real time. And we had put together, it took us, a year to get this project together. We had, I think, 2 weeks planned to run survey on a number of targets, including our number one, potential target. And I don't know if you've utilized these types of systems in the past, but they're incredibly capable systems, but they also require incredibly capable people, because they're in many cases they're one-off systems, or they're have special payloads integrated into them, and they can be pretty finicky. And so the first dive, the first operational dive on this target that we've been itching to look at for over a year, we deployed this system. It's about 700 feet of water, and the AUV did its first dive. It went down, and about halfway through the dive, it aborted due to a ground fault interruption. So it shorted out. It had some water intrusion in it, and it popped back to the surface, and it was completely fried. And we were done. The whole 2-week thing out the window, and we were kind of very despondent over this. However, we downloaded the partial data set that it did collect, and as it turned out, it produced the single best multi-beam image of a shipwreck that I've ever seen. It was the only time that we're able to definitively identify a shipwreck just from acoustics. It just looked like a model of a German submarine sitting on the bottom. So we had a very quick spike of complete despondence to complete elation in the span of about an hour. It was pretty fun. So
that is fantastic. That never happens.
I know. So there's many more stories in between, I'm sure, but that was the best worst one. So
I can only imagine when our equipment fails in the field, we're just normally out of luck.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trick of working in deep water and water in general. And you're offshore. The systems can, seawater and electronics are generally not very compatible. So it's amazing the work that we're able to get done given the challenges that we have, and between weather, equipment failures, working in these environments is really difficult. So it's always good when you come back with what you're looking for, even if you always hope for a little bit more.
So our last formal question is, how do you think archaeology can save the world?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think for me, I think that the exciting thing about archaeology, for me personally, and I think for a lot of people that engage in it and in cultural heritage or resource management in general, is the ability that archaeology has to inform identity. I think is increasingly important, particularly from a diversity and inclusion perspective. If you look at the majority of written history, there's the old adage of history's written by the victors, but history's also written by the powerful. And you look at ancient history, it's about kings and conquerors, and and big men. And archaeology has a really interesting focus on the mundane, which I guess is not an exciting way to say it, but what it does is it tells a story of people that are more accessible than those sort of lofty caricatures in some regards, and it gives a sort of a voice to underserved communities, but it gets people engaged in things that they might be surprised by. And for the work that we do in the maritime sphere in the oceans, the thing that I think is really incredible about that is with the interest on ocean literacy and climate science and all these things, you may not be able to engage folks on those merits alone, but getting folks engaged on, what ship did my grandfather come over on? What connections do I have to these things? And then learning about how interconnected the world really is. I think that's such an important thing now, showing the sort of interdependence of people with landscapes. There's a very emergent or important element of our field is looking not only at sort of these individual sites or sort of thematic studies, but looking at how they connect to the landscape and that sort of sense of place, and how they connect to other contexts, other cultures. I think that's a really important field of study to show that sort of interconnectedness and interdependence of our systems and our people and cultures. So I think that's where that's my sort of I guess a little lofty idea of what archaeology can do. I mean, we have a long road ahead of us on engagement, but I think those are the things that outside of sort of the academic pursuits of just increasing our knowledge base on things, I think that's where archaeology has the capacity to really engage people in a meaningful and powerful way.
I agree. I think archaeology tells the story of us as the everyday kind of person that's not going to have biographies written about, or their home isn't going to be turned into a museum where you can go through and walk and experience that person's life. Archaeology talks about the everyday man, and I think a lot of people can relate to that a lot more than reading about the histories of George Washington or King Henry VIII, or these, like you said, the powerful people who do have their histories heavily recorded.
Yeah.
And so our last question of the day is themed to our current environment, but what is keeping you sane during our quarantine?
Well, for me, I'm both fortunate and unfortunate in that I did just move. So I've not been twiddling my thumbs here at home. I've got a million little projects that I've been focusing on in the house. So by the time this is over, I'll have spit polished every doorknob in here and have it in tip-top shape. But most of my my best distraction has been just working on sort of setting up the new place and also these types of things. It's funny that these kind of conferencing apps and video communication means have obviously existed for quite a while, and I've always just done conference calls. I've hardly in the past really taken advantage of these systems, and it's pretty incredible. Like I've had a lot of Zoom cocktail hours and connecting with people. I've actually connected with a lot of folks that I just haven't connected with in a long time, because everyone's kind of got a little extra time in the evenings or is kind of feeling cooped up and looking for ways to connect with people. So it's been one silver lining to the madness.
It's a weird time to think about how, like you said earlier, interconnected we are and how connected we can be. And I feel like this pandemic is bringing people a little bit closer, and it's getting to settle into the new routine, and hopefully some, scheduled quarantine keep happening after we're all back into our busy, rushing lives.
Yeah. No, it's been an interesting time.
That it has been. Well, that's all I have for today. So I wanted to say thank you for joining us, and
Thank you.
check us out next time on our next episode of Tea and Trowels. Cheers.